He's the Man of Steel, the Man of Tomorrow, and sometimes he's electric blue. What are the best Superman stories of all time? Hi, I'm Jason Inman.
I'm Ashley Victoria Robinson.
And we're here to answer some of your geek questions. Today, specifically, we're going to answer what are some of the best Superman stories. We're going to talk about our two favorites, and then we're going to go down into the weeds. This, of course, is a poll that was answered on our Patreon over at patreon.com/Jawiin, which is the place where you can join the Super Friends Hall of Justice, support this channel, support our podcast, Geek History Lesson, also get yourself a little bit of Crisis Club, the 12-part video series where we dissect Crisis on Infinite Earths, and you get to answer cool polls like this. All right, today's topic is best Superman stories. Ashley, I'm going to start us out because for me, of course, is our favorites, not our objective best. I think there is an obvious top choice for this.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, I think the obvious top choice, of course, is the Electric Superman saga. The saga where Superman turns into an electricity being and he has the badass electric blue costume of all time.
Some people think you're serious.
I do love that story, but no, I'm not serious. Actually, to me, when thinking about best Superman stories, my favorite choice, and what I think objectively for me is the best Superman story, is All-Star Superman. This is Grant Morrison's and Frank Quitely's 12-part series, part of the All-Star line that was supposed to be an all-encompassing line. They were supposed to get All-Stars Flash, All-Star Batgirl. None of the rest of them ever happened. Because even this book was delayed when it was coming out. It came out every other month. But this is basically the 12 epic labors of Hercules as told through Superman, because Superman finds out that he's going to die, and he sort of goes around on a journey seeing the last parts of his life. We get a Pa Kent issue, we get a Lois Lane issue, we get a Lex Luthor issue, we get a 2-part Bizarro issue, and this is the Superman story that takes all the silly junk from the Silver Age of comics and smashes them into every era of Superman. And I'm going to tell you, the arc of this book is amazing. And the way that this book treats every era of Superman is that it all matters is fantastic. I think this book is very accessible for comic book readers, anybody that wants to try Superman, but I do think you get something more out of it if you have a knowledge base of the DC Universe. I think if you know a little bit about the history of Superman, this book will be a better read, but I do think that Grant Morrison takes it all down. And speaking of Electric Superman's in this storyline.
Imagine that.
He's in All-Star Superman. I don't want to give you brief spoilers for the very first issue. Yes, he appears in the first issue. But great characterizations, great piece of heart. Because to me, that's what all the best Superman stories have. They need to have a piece of heart. You need to see this Kansas farm boy trying his best for the good of the world, because his biggest enemies are things that can attack his heart, not his body. And that's why I think All-Star Superman is. I think we'll have a link down below in the description if you want to buy this book.
Any of these that we talk about, you can get down in the description of the video.
Ashley, what would you put on the top of your list for the best Superman stories?
I would definitely put a story that I think is really also very accessible and great for people who think maybe they don't like Superman stories. Because a lot of people think that because Superman in broad strokes, I think, feels less easy to identify with than a character like Batman, even though Batman only works for the 1% in his early origins, and you'd have to be one of the 1% to be Batman. So
and you have to murder your parents. Your parents have to be murdered.
That makes it actually a little less accessible than just being a good person, which is an interesting paradigm that we can talk about in another video. And that is Kurt Busiek's Secret Identity, Superman: Secret Identity.
Drawn by Stuart Immonen.
Yes, incredibly beautiful, incredibly thoughtful examination of the character, and it is set in the real world, and there's a boy named Clark Kent who, of course, has read Superman comics and goes through his life with the pressure of what that means, and then, spoilers, may or may not actually become Superman.
Yeah.
And what that means to onboard all of these sort of broad strokes that we were talking about, all this goodness that we think of as the big blue Boy Scout, and how you can transition that into what feels like a more modern, contemporary, grounded world. It manages to hit a lot of the tropes of a classic Superman story, which for me, when I came into the story, I hadn't read a lot of Superman. It helped to explain to me why they became tropes and why you think of these as building blocks, why specific characters are important, and how Superman is modern and is resonant, even though he was created 80 years ago.
I would say that this story is highly underrated. A lot of people don't know about the story because it was published, I think, in the late 90s. They just put out like a deluxe hardcover version of it.
A really nice version of it.
Fun fact, this story was actually Kurt Busiek's pitch for Superboy Prime. If you don't know who Superboy Prime is, he is the Superboy that was part of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Slight plug for Crisis Club. Patreon.com/Alvin. Superboy Prime was always based on I can't remember the name. If it was, I think it was Earth Prime. Earth Prime in the DC universe is supposed to be our Earth, and that's the reason why he was the only superhero. This was Kurt Busiek's pitch for Superboy Prime, but in the 90s, the multiverse was gone,
and we didn't like Superboy Prime.
So the DC editors at the time said, just write a story about a boy named Clark Kent.
Yeah.
And make the rest work.
It's amazing. It's completely incredible. It introduces
so good.
2 original characters toward the end who I really, really love, and I would kill to have action figures of.
And if I remember right, doesn't he actually marry a woman named Lois?
Yes, he does.
Yes, I couldn't remember this right. Yeah.
I think it's even. Excuse me. I think it's even Lois Lane.
Oh, I don't know. Okay, I know it's Lois. I don't know if it's a Lois Lane.
But yes, they get married. It's very, very sweet, and I think it hits the perfect balance of a superhero story and the sentimentality that you want for Superman, because Superman's got some feelings going on.
He does.
Yeah, this is a book that when I worked at comic book stores, I would recommend to people to watch.
Ooh.
Yeah.
All right. So, let's go down the other list.
Also Rands?
Yes, before we have another dramatic pause.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dramatic pause. Okay. That was the full-on Shatner for you. I think if we're going to talk about some other great Superman stories, one that really stands out to me is a recent run. It is I would just call it I don't know how to really divide it up. It doesn't really have a name, but I would call the Peter Tomasi, Patrick Gleason, Dan Jurgens DC Rebirth run. It's the run from the beginning of DC Rebirth to Action 1000. All of that little bubble. It's about 45 issues of Superman, and it's about 45 issues of Action Comics. This is like Action Comics like 980 to 1000. This run is really great. This is really the run where Jonathan Kent, Superman's son, and Superman create a super family. Now, the great thing about this book is that the Peter Tomasi, Patrick Gleason run really on Superman, they write Superman, really dives down into the family dynamics. And then Dan Jurgens, because what is Dan Jurgens a master of? Action. They give him Action Comics, and he just gets to have the giant adventures. Like, his Superman book is just like, okay, you don't want a Superman family dynamics? Okay, this is Superman punching Doomsday. This is Superman punching Zod. This is Superman having a time travel adventure with Booster Gold, because Dan Jurgens created Booster Gold. So it's a nice counterbalance. They're all in some really nice deluxe hardcovers, 4 each. Great. I think it's one of the best Superman runs in a long time. And I also think because of Jonathan Kent, it's super accessible.
Nice. I love Jonathan Kent is one of my favorite modern conceits of Superman. I love him so much. And this was the first Superman run that I read, like in Action Comics, that I read live as it was coming out. Yeah. So I definitely co-sign on that.
Any other you would like to add to the list?
A couple more are also like really easy to get into origin stories. I think
and again, these extras will be down below as well.
Yeah, totally. I think Superman Birthright is very, very accessible. Birthright is, if you like movies, well, I'd actually, so Secret Origin is what I describe as the Smallville origin for comics.
Oh, interesting. I described...
And Birthright is what I consider to be the action movie version.
All right, we should clarify. Superman Birthright is the Mark Waid Superman origin, and then about 5 years later, Jeff Johns wrote Superman Secret Origin, which is the Jeff Johns version. I prefer Birthright.
However...
But I call Birthright... Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to clarify my comments. Superman Birthright, I call it the Smallville version because it came out when Smallville was on the air, and there's a little hints that they were trying to tie it into Smallville. But I understand why you would give Secret Origin the Smallville thing, because it's about Lex and Superman growing up.
Yeah, I think Secret Origin, if you are a person who is most familiar with or only really loves Smallville...
I own them both.
Which is... right. I think Secret Origin is a better barrier to entry. I think Birthright is more for someone who like loves the Marvel movies and loves the DC movies. I think it's the big action piece. I do think it's better. That's why it's the one that's still in print. They're both really, really great if you're looking for like an ease of entry story. There's a lot of really classic Superman storylines, but they're more mired in continuity. like the death of Superman, for example,
Yeah.
is like a wonderful Superman story. For the man who has everything is a wonderful Superman story, but
Alan Moore.
they're steeped in
Yeah.
what was continuity at the time, so they're a little tougher to access to just go and pick off the shelves. I really like Superman in the Jeff Johns Teen Titans run because he's one of the only members of the Justice League who's actually willing to let the young heroes take their own power into their own hands and claim their own identities, but it's not his story. He's very much an ancillary character in that.
For last thing, I want to add 2 also rans onto our list, and they're both tie-in comic books. There are a series of collections. Back in the 90s, there was this comic book series called Superman Adventures. Now, back in the 90s, DC, when they would tie into Batman animated series and Justice League animated series and Superman animated series, they would just call it Justice League Adventures, Batman Adventures, Superman Adventures. The Superman title, Superman Adventures, is the tie-in to the Superman animated series. It's drawn in that style, but they're great one-and-done stories. They've only collected the first 4 volumes of it, so they're missing like a 5. They need like 5 and a 6.
Tweet to DC if you want more of them.
I want
Tweet
more.
them.
I want more of them because they're great and they require no continuity. They're perfect to give to kids. They're perfect to give to adults. Fun fact: Mark Millar's first DC work is in Superman Adventures, and they're amazing. Another one I would say is that if you don't know this, there was a digital comic book that they've been publishing in trades called Smallville Season 11. At the time when it was being published, just prior to the New 52, it was the best Superman story on the stands. It is a perfect continuation of the TV show if you like the TV show, and it's great.
They're great stories even if you don't like the TV show.
Well, because they introduced this idea of Batman, they introduced this idea of Wonder Woman.
Batgirl?
They do their own version of Crisis. Sadly, they are almost all collected except for the final chapter. They only need one more trade to do it, but you can find them digitally on DC. They're both really great things. So thank you so much for all our patrons over at patreon.com/Jawiin for suggesting best Superman stories. If you want to go over there and suggest some stories, go to patreon.com/Jawiin, join the Super Friends Hall of Justice, and we'll welcome you inside. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to go down in the comments and tell us what your favorite Superman story is. While you're down there, click subscribe. And Ashley, we have a podcast, right? Where can they listen to that?
We do Geek History Lesson at geekhistorylesson.com. We have a ton of Superman-related content, so go there, check out the feed, download, and have a listen.
Thanks for watching.